National Catholic Register. This is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
Since the start of his second term, President Donald Trump has issued a flurry of executive orders focusing on transgender ideology. It could be the turning of the tide in the effort to restore biological and cultural common sense. But are the deeper foundations regarding transgender ideology being addressed? What is a Catholic response to the executive orders? This week on Register Radio, we're joined by Register contributor Jennifer Roback Morse to discuss Bishop Robert Barron's recent public assessment of the orders. And then, Register senior contributor Edward Pentin talks to us about the deepening crisis of faith and culture facing England. Is Christianity in the British Isles now in irrecoverable decline? Hello, I'm Matthew Bunson, host of Register Radio and EWTN News' Vice President and Editorial Director. I'm joined in studio here in Washington, D.C., as always, by Shannon Mullen, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register. Ed, how are you?
Very, very well, Matthew. Great to be with you.
Well, as I was just saying, President Donald Trump promised on the campaign trail to curb transgender ideology in the government, in culture, and especially in women's sports. He has begun his new administration by keeping that promise with a flurry of executive orders. But what exactly has the president decreed, and will it have a lasting effect? And what should Catholics consider when assessing these political and cultural moves? Bishop Robert Barron, in his capacity as chairman of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Laity, Marriage, Family Life, and Youth, recently weighed in on the executive orders signed by President Trump, in particular one, protecting children from chemical and surgical mutilation. The bishop wrote, quote, "Helping young people accept their bodies and their vocation as women and men is the true path of freedom and happiness." Now, to discuss all of this, we're joined by Jennifer Roback Morse, Register contributor and the founder and president of the Ruth Institute, which helps the victims of the sexual revolution recover from their experiences and become advocates for positive change. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks to you all for publishing the column that I wrote about this topic.
Well, I couldn't wait to have this conversation with you because, for two things. One, it's a great reflection on something that someone else had to say, in this case, Bishop Barron. But it's pulling together a lot of the threads that I think for Catholics are very important, and that is, what should the Catholic response be to these executive orders beyond just the noise that we're hearing, especially in the media?
Well, what I liked about Bishop Barron's statement was twofold. First of all, he said what needed to be said about the ideology of transgenderism. You know, the sentence that you quoted is very important, and he also said it is unacceptable that our children are encouraged to undergo destructive medical interventions instead of receiving access to authentic and bodily unitive care. So he's taking a very strong stand about the underlying issue of transgenderism. But at the same time, what I really liked about it is that he stuck to the main principle. You know, he basically said the Catholic position is that there are two genders. You're born as a male or a female, and you cannot change the sex of the body. When people have, and he didn't even get into the whole issue of intersex individuals or people who have some kind of unusual disorder of sexual development. He didn't even go there. He just stuck to the main topic, which is male and female, you know, and the need to socially affirm that. And he did not go into the policy details, which I think is the right thing for the Catholic Church at this level to do. In other words, there are a whole bunch of details that are going to have to be worked out to implement these executive orders. The Catholic Church doesn't have one answer to how you're going to deal with the insurance companies or the schools or the changing rooms, you know. But we state the principle, and then the clergy, the church, states the principles, and then trust the laymen and laywomen in their capacity as private citizens and participants in the government to deal with how best to implement it, you know. And so I was just very tickled by what Bishop Barron had to say here. I thought it was right. He hit the nail right on the head in both of those arenas.
Yeah, Jennifer, I did too. I thought you hit the nail right on the head, too. The way you framed your piece, and you make the point relative to what you were just speaking about, is the discernment that goes into sound public policy, right? There's, as you said, there's not one policy answer to gender ideology or any more than there is to immigration, right? So can you talk a little bit about that discernment and what you're referring to there?
Yes. Well, I'm glad you brought up that panoply of public policies that have multiple answers. You know, if the question is immigration or welfare policy or healthcare policy, there are a lot of possible policy choices that are consistent with Catholic moral teaching. But if the question is, can a boy become a girl? The answer is no. There's only one answer to that question. If the question is it morally acceptable to deliberately take an innocent human life? The answer is always no. And that kind of question, that kind of answer, that's where the church needs to be clear, right? What you're going to do about all of the other issues that are floating around, once you decide, well, no, we're not going to allow people to kill their innocent babies, how are we going to address all the other problems around that? Well, there are a lot of possible answers to that question. And so that's what I was trying to draw out. What are the moral principles for which there's really only one answer versus the whole range of possible policy choices that would go into making a decision about how we're going to implement Catholic social teaching.
Well, and as you write, that Bishop Barron's statement spoke to issues squarely within the Church's expertise. What is the nature of reality? What does it mean to be human? What will really make us happy? And I was struck by the fact that Bishop Barron really went to that specific spot regarding what is going to make people happy, what is authentic happiness. So from your standpoint then, these executive orders, in your analysis, this is obviously a step in the right direction, but what needs to follow?
Well, first of all, before we go there, I want to just say the whole sexual revolution is proposing a theory of human nature. They're proposing that what will make us truly happy is acting on our sexual impulses. That if we just get rid of the sexual taboos, we'll all be happier. Those taboos are unnecessary. They don't do anything constructive, so on and so forth. They are proposing a theory of human nature, what it means to be human and what will make us happy. I think it's very important that Catholics, whenever possible, get right down to that core issue. Well, heck no, that's not what's going to make us happy. Are you crazy? We have enough experience with that to tell us that that's simply not the case. Here's what will make us happy. So that's really important. And sorry, what was the other thing you wanted to talk about?
Well, I wanted your take on these executive orders because you really teed us off nicely by stressing the fact that one of the first things that President Trump did was defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. It's a lengthy thing, but it's obvious. It says the United States government recognizes two sexes, male and female. But these other executive orders, from your standpoint, do they go far enough? Are they a right step? What has to happen next?
As far as I can tell so far, the executive orders that I have seen so far are all steps in the correct direction, okay? But what I hope people are seeing is that the transgender ideology has been insinuated into so many nooks and crannies of society that getting it all out is going to take a lot more than a handful of executive orders, okay? So Trump, by issuing the executive order, he gave the rest of the government something to work with to go into the insurance commissions, to go into the medical boards, to go into the schools, and dismantle the various places where this ideology has been put into place. But there are going to be a lot more details that are going to have to be worked out. I'll just give you one example. The question of insurance coverage for detransitioners. You may not know this. Most people don't know this. But insurance covers transition, this stuff that claims to be changing the sex of the body. In most states, that's covered, and it's covered. Coverage has come in sometimes through legislation, sometimes it's come in through rulings by insurance boards, okay? But whether a person like Chloe Cole, who has a whole realm of medical problems associated with the transition itself, and who wishes to get her body back in some way, right, to try to correct some of what was done to her, that's not covered. Well, that's outrageous that it's not covered. But how you're going to make sure that it's covered depends on what has already taken place in each particular state. So people are going to somebody's going to have to get in there and go into the weeds, as they say, and hammer out those details of how you're going to do justice to somebody like Chloe Cole and these other detransitioners who are out there. So that's how, and I also want to call attention to just how deeply this thing has gotten into the schools. If you look at Trump's original executive order, he does list out places, specific places where he's saying, you got to do this and you got to do that, But he also says, not limited to, you got to do this, not only this, but this and anything else like it. And most of that list is stuff that the Department of Education has been doing to insinuate transgender ideology into the schools across the United States. So that's something for people to keep their eye on.
Jennifer, maybe a good place for us to wrap up is to talk about, the executive orders close some doors that we would say need to be closed. But other doors have to open to help young people, to help families who are struggling with some of these issues. Where can they go now?
Well, we've been dealing with this issue at the Ruth Institute for quite a few years by now. And so I get this question all the time. And so we finally compiled everything together in one place at our website. It's called ruthinstitute.org. We have what we call resource centers. If you go in there and you see resource centers, you will find something called the Parent Resource Center. And in the Parent Resource Center, we have pulled together various organizations who are working in this area, including therapeutic organizations, parent support groups, legal organizations. My golly, there are parents who need to find good legal representation, things that are dealing with public policy advocacy, even children's books. You would be amazed at how many children's books are out there telling kids that they can become whatever they want to become. And so we've found a few books, at least, that attempt to help the kids not think that, help the kids be satisfied with their bodies. And so we have all of that at the Parent Resource Center. Whole bunch of other organizations that we're, in effect, sending people to. But there is quite a bit of help out there, and I would really encourage people to go check that out.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for your reflections. Thank you for your piece on Bishop Barron, and thank you for your work in trying to restore some sanity to culture.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I'm very glad for your help getting the word out.
Well, when we come back to Register Radio, we're going to take a look at the state of faith in England, and it's a rather lamentable picture. I'm going to be joined by Edward Pentin. Please stay tuned to Register Radio here on EWTN.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
And welcome back. I'm Matthew Bunson here in the D.C. studios with Shannon Mullen, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register. As our next guest has just written in a very important analysis piece for the National Catholic Register, each week news stories from the United Kingdom seem to emerge of public disorder and violent crime, a pervading culture of death seen most recently in proposed assisted suicide legislation or bans on praying outside abortion facilities, rising rates of divorce and cohabitation, totalitarian forms of government, an epidemic of mental illness, a loss of faith in the country's institutions, and an economy in decline. Combined with the collapse of Christianity and mounting woke secularism, it's a pretty grim picture indeed. And we're joined now by the writer of that important analysis, Register Senior Contributor Edward Pentin. Edward, welcome back.
Thank you, Matthew. Good to be with you as always.
Well, I'd love to have a really happy topic to discuss, but clearly, as you have just laid out in almost relentless fashion, something is happening in the United Kingdom, but it's also somewhat emblematic of the West, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's I don't know whether it's because Britain was the first it was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution there, that it's sort of bearing the brunt, it seems, in many ways of this. But it does seem to be very visible, this sort of decline, certainly spiritually and morally, as I put in the piece, which is sort of linked to the rest of the decline. I think that's what the many observers that I talked to for this piece would agree with, that the two seem to be linked.
Well, your piece is England's Decline as Our Lady's Dowry Wanes. Is the Catholic faith set for a revival? And you can find it at ncregister.com. Two very interesting points made in that one headline. We're talking about England's very clear decline, but is the Catholic faith set for a revival? But before we get to that possible revival, talk about the state of Catholicism in the British Isles.
Yes, I mean, the Catholicism, as probably many listeners know, it revived in the 19th century, the Emancipation, and it came back after the Reformation in that sense. But it's always been very much a minority in the country. I think it's 10% of the population are Catholic, and the established church, the Church of England, has always been obviously the established church. It's where most of Christians belong to. But all the churches, all the denominations have suffered in especially the last 30 years. They've all declined. I think the statistics are that the percentage is down to who say that they're Christian has gone from 72% in 2001 to 46% in 2021. So in 20 years, it's basically become a non-Christian country in that sense. There's only 1.2% of Church of England members who go to regular services, and even in the Catholic Church now we have a very small number, a relatively small number now of Catholics who go to church as well. So it's all very much signs that there's a sort of rapid de-Christianization of the country.
And is it also factually correct that there are more, as an actual number of people, Catholics in Scotland attending Mass on any given week than there are members of the Church of Scotland going to their services? Is that technically correct?
Well, yes. I mean, in that sense, I think that is true. Overall in Britain, I think the fact is that because there's been a large migration wave over the last 30 years, we've had lots of migrants from Poland, although many went back after Brexit. But those did sort of give a boost to the church attendance in Britain, including, of course, England and Wales, and two separate churches, Catholic churches there. But yes, so that has given a certain boost to the attendance, but it's still very low and it's decreasing all the time. Yeah.
Edward, you've got a great story when even before you get into your story, there's a lot that you can unpack here. One, I want to go back to the headline for a second and ask you to talk maybe just for a little bit about what you mean by Our Lady's Dowry. And then right on top of your story, there's this incredible picture of Canterbury Cathedral that was taken more than a year ago. Can you tell us what was going on in that photo?
Yes, sure. Well, Our Lady's Dowry is a title that dates back to Anglo-Saxon times when England was given that title, and it's always therefore had a very special sort of relationship, if you like, to Our Lady. Just as France is the eldest daughter of the church, for example, ours has always been Our Lady's Dowry. Of course, that's been, I think many British people would be totally unaware that that's the title of devotion that's been given to the country now, but it does date back to a long time, and I think it's a very special thing for English Catholics. Anyone who is an English Catholic, practicing Catholic, knows this, and so I wanted to just say in the headline that it is important to show that it is waning, but the darkness comes before the dawn, and that possibly there could be a revival in time. But yes, the picture of Canterbury Cathedral. Well, this happened last year when there was a silent disco in the cathedral to raise money for it, because of course it's very difficult now because there's so few churchgoers to keep the the coffers going in the cathedral and in many churches in England. So they're looking for ways to raise money, and they're looking for desperate ways like this. And it caused a lot of uproar, even among non-Catholics, even among non-Christians found it distasteful and wrong. But again, it's another sign of the decline and how much the Church of England particularly is in a very, very difficult time, going through a very tumultuous time as well, and losing a lot of members and trying to desperately to find ways to bring them in, but it's not working.
The social, political, and cultural decline seems to stretch over both major political parties, doesn't it? I mean, you've got Labour, which is wildly unpopular, but you had the Conservatives, the Tories, who were just as unpopular and ushered out of political power.
Right, and again, this is traced to the lack of a sort of a cohesive sort of moral understanding of what is moral, what is right, what is true, and that, of course, is linked to the faith. And so, and faith and reason in particular, and you can see it affecting all the parties in many ways. So even though the Conservative Party used to be a sort of bastion, used to be called the Church of England of prayer, when the Church of England was pretty solid in many ways, certainly on morals, but not anymore. And now it's completely seems to have lost any sort of any strong sort of moral fibre that it used to have. And even the Conservative Party was the party that introduced same-sex marriage in the country. So that gives you an idea of just how it's fallen as well.
Edward, of course, a lot of these problems that you're talking about, all of them really infect other Western societies, including ours here in the United States. But in the United States, there's at least some signals that the fever may be breaking, as it were. I take it you're not seeing that in England right now.
That's true, Shannon. I mean, yes, it's interesting, though, seeing how many people here who were very dismissive of President Trump before, thought he was, not really up to sort of leading the country, are changing their mind now because they're seeing that he's actually taking on this agenda, this woke agenda, and this decline in morals, surprisingly for many people, and they're seeing that as a great hopeful sign. But you're right, in Britain, there doesn't seem to be an equivalent force. There is the Reform Party, but people do think that certainly Catholics that I've spoken to and other observers believe that that's not going to be very long-lasting if there's no real faith behind it. There's no Christian faith behind it, especially the Catholic faith, and they don't seem to have that. So even though there are certain signs of a sort of change bubbling up in the political sense, whether that's going to be long-lasting seems pretty doubtful at the moment. But who knows? That it's certainly something to watch.
So we talk about the hope for the future in some fashion. Can you point to one event, one movement that you're seeing in England right now that within the church, for example, that could have a lasting influence in the next generation?
Yes, I think probably two things. I think there is a certain development within the younger generations who are looking towards, or they're sort of waking up to the problems with the culture of death. I think there is a certain realization among the young that this is not good. This is not what they want. This is something that the older generations imposed on them. And I think there is, certainly if you see how the March for Life is growing in attendance here, that seems to be a sign of hope. The other one is tradition, and you see, as in a lot of over the West, young people coming to the traditional faith. They want to go to the traditional Mass, and they're not seeing that same sort of growth in the rest of the church. And so those seem to be areas where there's a sign of something happening. And I think just looking around, you get a sense that Britain is really ripe for evangelization. There's such a need here that for people to find meaning in their lives and to find truth and what comes next after this life. There's a great need here for people they're looking for those answers. And so that's another sign, I think, that we could be on the cusp of a revival.
Wow.
But again,
let's hope and pray for it and work for it. Edward Pentin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Well, before we end this week, Shannon, I wanted to talk to you very briefly about what readers can look for in our upcoming print edition.
Well, both the pieces that we've talked about today, Jennifer's and Edward's, are both in this current issue. It's also our Lenten issue, so there's a lot of content for readers to prepare for Lent. One of my favorite pieces there is 5 things you should not do with your Lent. I made note of that. A couple of things are worth marking down there. And we also have a couple of stories about J.D. Vance, including a story about an exchange that the vice president had with our own Jonathan Liedl on X. So lots in there, this issue.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to next week. But in the meantime, again, you can find a host of information for more news, analysis, and commentary. Go to ncregister.com. Thanks so much for joining us here on Register Radio, here on EWTN. Until next week, on behalf of our producer, Michael McCall, my co-host, Shannon Mullen, and myself, I pray that God take care of you and God bless you.